You know that moment when something small, almost meaningless, suddenly turns into a whirlwind that everyone remembers forever? That was me, back in the early 90s, just trying to make it through another retail shift, completely unaware of the chaos I was about to set in motion. Hi, I'm Evelyn Evie Clark, and I've had my fair share of strange jobs over the years, but this one taught me more about courage, the absurdity of management, and the unexpected ways small actions can ripple outward than any other. It was December. You know that December smell: pine, cinnamon, a faint trace of dust and carpet cleaner because, of course, retail stores always tried to make the holidays smell magical. And this store? Oh, it was one of those sprawling department stores that's long gone now. 3 levels packed wall to wall with everything imaginable. Toys, sweaters, electronics, kitchenware, stacked in a way that made aisles barely navigable. Walking through them felt like navigating a labyrinth designed by someone who clearly had no respect for fire codes. Picture this: a cashier trying to make change while dodging towering stacks of sweaters and fragile electronics. A stock clerk like me weaving through racks that seemed ready to collapse with the slightest touch. And in the middle of all this chaos, it hit me like a cold gust from a winter door left ajar. This place was a fire hazard waiting to happen. Blocked exits, aisles impossible to pass without squeezing and twisting like a contortionist, products piled high like they might just sprout legs and walk away. It was overwhelming, and it was the kind of thing that, if the fire department ever showed up, we'd be shut down in a heartbeat. I mentioned it casually to one of the supervisors while helping her adjust some holiday displays. Half joking, half serious, I said, "If the fire department ever came in, they'd shut us down for this." Her response was instant, sharp, and completely unfiltered. "You know what? Then call the fire department." I froze for a moment, my hands shooting up in mock surrender. "Easy," I said, unsure if she realized she just handed me permission to do something completely absurd. "But rules are rules, right?" She said it, so I intended to follow through. The rest of my shift was a blur of stocking shelves and helping customers, trying to appear normal while internally rehearsing what it would even mean to call the fire department. Would someone think I was joking? Would it escalate? My mind raced through scenarios, each one more ridiculous than the last. When my shift finally ended, I decided to stop by a nearby government building on my way home. One of those massive office complexes that house every agency imaginable, complete with reception desks that might as well have been fortresses. I approached the front desk and explained my predicament. The crammed aisles, the blocked exits, my supervisor's sarcastic instruction. The receptionist, unflappable, pointed to a phone on the wall. "Tell the operator you want the fire department," she said, "and they'll patch you through to the station's non-emergency line." My heart raced. Me calling the fire department over a sarcastic comment from a stressed supervisor? It sounded insane, but irresistible. I picked up the receiver and dialed. The seconds stretched, and then a deep, commanding voice answered. The fire chief himself. I explained everything. The aisles, the blocked exits, the sheer density of the products, and yes, I included my supervisor's cheeky dare. There was a pause and then a hearty laugh. "We'll check it out," he said. I hung up, feeling like I'd just whispered a secret to the universe. But this wasn't a secret. It was a warning. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't just moral. It's also the easiest way to make people very, very uncomfortable. That night, walking home in the crisp December air, I reflected on the absurdity of it all. How many people could say they called the fire department because a supervisor was frazzled and sarcastic? And yet here I was, on the verge of creating a ripple effect that would eventually involve fire engines, deputies, and a store manager who would discover that authority has limits, even in peak holiday season. The next morning, I walked into the store like any other day. Shelves were stacked, registers buzzing, customers moving in a steady flow. I stocked, smiled, and helped wherever needed, but I carried with me a quiet sense of anticipation, a sense that something big was about to happen, even though I had no idea just how big. As I moved through the aisles, dodging towering stacks of toys and sweaters, I noticed again the blocked exits, the impossibly narrow pathways. It all looked worse in the cold light of morning. the chaos magnified. But instead of fear, I felt a thrill, a strange mix of anxiety and empowerment. I had followed instructions. I had acted. And soon, everyone else would feel the weight of those actions. My supervisor, blissfully unaware of the plan unfolding from her offhand comment, floated by, stressed but entirely normal. She handed me a clipboard, muttered a few instructions, and moved on. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had sparked a chain reaction that she would never fully realize. I found my way to the front of the store, watching customers weave carefully through the aisles. Boxes teetered precariously, displays groaned under weight, and I couldn't help but think, if the fire department ever came here, the chaos would be undeniable. And soon, they would. Looking back now, I can laugh at the absurdity, but at the time, the tension was real. It was December, the busiest shopping month, and I had a front row seat to the slow buildup of an event that would transform the store, the staff, and the store manager's perception of authority. That day, I learned something crucial. Sometimes courage doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers through small, seemingly absurd actions. And sometimes a sarcastic comment can change everything. By the end of my shift, I was already imagining what would happen when the phone rang in the fire department, when engines rolled in, when rules and regulations collided with corporate stubbornness. And I couldn't stop smiling, because I knew deep down that chaos, controlled chaos, was coming. Episode 1 closes here, with the calm before the storm, the stage set for action, and the audience hanging on the edge, waiting for the first real wave of consequences. The night I decided to follow through with my supervisor's sarcastic comment, I felt a mix of nerves, mischief, and responsibility. Walking through the cold December streets toward the government building, I kept thinking, this is insane. No one ever does this. But rules are rules. The building loomed ahead, a towering concrete and glass structure that housed every imaginable agency. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly, echoing in the cavernous hallways. I approached the front desk and explained my situation. The store crammed with products, aisles blocked, exits unusable, and yes, the supervisor who told me, then call the fire department. The receptionist listened, nodding without judgment. She pointed to a wall-mounted phone. Tell the operator you want the fire department, she said, and they'll connect you to the station's non-emergency line. I swallowed hard and dialed. Every second stretched. What am I doing? I thought. This is going to get me fired, or worse. The line connected. A deep, commanding voice answered. Fire department. Chief's office. My heart jumped. The chief himself. I could barely speak. But I did. I explained everything. The aisles, blocked exits, the labyrinthine layout of products stacked haphazardly, and my supervisor's cheeky little dare. I wasn't exaggerating. This place was a hazard, a time bomb in holiday shopping form. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that made me sweat through my coat. And then, laughter, deep, hearty, contagious. We'll check it out, he said. I hung up and leaned against the wall, letting out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I had done it. I had called the fire department. And the chief was coming. My mind raced. How would they react? Would anyone take me seriously? Could this spiral completely out of control? The next morning, I walked into the store like nothing had happened, but the anticipation made my steps feel heavier. Stocking shelves, assisting customers, weaving through impossibly narrow aisles. I felt a strange mixture of dread and thrill. Every creak of a display, every box teetering on the edge, reminded me that soon, the consequences of my call would be real. And then I heard it. A low rumble from the parking lot. At first I thought it was delivery trucks. But no, the rumble grew into a deep, resonant sound. Fire engines, red and massive, lights flashing. My chest tightened. This wasn't imagination. This was real. The fire chief strode into the store, flanked by a team of firefighters moving with a calm, commanding precision. Their uniforms were pristine, their demeanor professional, their presence unmistakable. My stomach twisted, part awe, part anxiety. This is really happening. The chief walked straight to the store manager, who looked like a deer caught in headlights. Sir, the manager said, adjusting his tie, We have everything under control. The displays are corporate mandated. The chief's eyes scanned the aisles, taking in the chaos. Blocked exits, stacks teetering precariously, pathways narrower than allowed. These aisles are blocked, and exits are not fully accessible, he said. Many fixtures will need to be repositioned. The manager's jaw tightened. I have corporate orders. Nothing moves until corporate says otherwise. A chill ran down my spine. Something monumental was about to happen. All right, gentlemen. If the fixtures stay, we have no choice, the chief said calmly, the weight of authority in his voice unmistakable. Then came the words that would echo through the store and ripple through every employee's day. Close them down. Doors locked, exits blocked, and across 3 levels, customers and staff alike froze. The store manager protested, voice rising. You can't do this. It's December. Peak shopping season. A firefighter, calm and measured, responded, Sir, I can do this. And I will do this. Moments later, the sheriff's department arrived, deputies moving with precision and authority. The store had transformed into a command center, filled with the orchestrated chaos of law, order, and enforced compliance. And there I stood, watching the surreal scene unfold, part incredulous, part amused. The irony wasn't lost on me. All of this traced back to a sarcastic comment from a stressed supervisor. Call the fire department. And I had. The firefighters moved methodically through the store, measuring aisles, adjusting displays, even lifting heavy racks to create safe passageways. Every step was precise, calculated, and purposeful. Employees whispered to each other, finally realizing that corporate directives, as ironclad as they seemed, could not override the law. The store manager's voice grew louder, desperation creeping in. We're losing money. Customers are angry. Corporate will be furious. The chief's reply was simple, unwavering. Safety comes first. Comply now or face consequences later. Hours passed. The store, initially chaotic, gradually began to transform. Aisles cleared, displays repositioned, products stacked safely. The chaos gave way to order. The customers, though initially wide-eyed and confused, began to move through the store more freely, unaware of the meticulous work happening behind the scenes. I wandered the aisles, feeling a strange sense of pride. I had followed instructions, acted responsibly, and triggered a chain of events that no one, including the stressed supervisor or even the store manager, could ignore. And yet, I remained invisible in the grand scheme, quietly observing as safety and law trumped corporate stubbornness. By mid-afternoon, the chief nodded to the manager. Everything is now compliant. You may reopen. Customers trickled back in, oblivious to the lessons just learned. The supervisor wandered by, unaware of the monumental role her sarcasm had played. And me? I smiled faintly, satisfied with a small, quiet victory. That day, I realized something profound. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through small, seemingly absurd actions. Following through, even on instructions that seem ridiculous, can have ripple effects you never imagined. And sometimes, chaos isn't destructive. It's corrective. The morning air inside the store was thick with the usual December chaos. Holiday music playing, customers bustling, and the faint smell of pine-scented air fresheners trying to mask the dust and cardboard that seemed permanent this time of year. But beneath the surface, something was different. I could feel it before I even saw the fire engines rumbling through the parking lot. Then came the unmistakable sound. A deep, resonant roar of sirens echoing across the asphalt. I froze, turning toward the entrance. My stomach knotted. Red and massive fire engines, lights flashing, stormed into the parking lot. The kind of presence that makes everyone, employees and customers alike, stop and take notice. My heart pounded. This wasn't a drill. The fire chief himself stepped out first, tall, calm, and authoritative. Behind him, uniformed firefighters moved with a precise, practiced efficiency, carrying clipboards, measuring tools, and a sense of purpose that made the entire store feel small and vulnerable. I watched from my position near the aisles, weaving between displays, trying to keep my movements casual while my mind raced. This is really happening. This is really happening. The chief walked straight to the store manager, who now looked pale and unprepared. Sir, the manager began, adjusting his tie nervously. "We have everything under control. The displays are corporate mandated." The chief's eyes swept the entire floor, cataloging blocked aisles, precarious stacks of products, and obstructed exits. "These aisles are blocked, and exits are not fully accessible," he said calmly but firmly. "Many fixtures will need to be repositioned immediately." The manager's jaw clenched. "I have corporate orders. Nothing moves until corporate says otherwise." The chief nodded slowly, as if weighing his words carefully. "All right, gentlemen. If the fixtures stay, we have no choice." And then came the words that would send shockwaves through the store. "Close them down." Doors were locked. Exits blocked. Across 3 levels, employees froze, customers gawked, and the store manager's face turned a shade of disbelief that I can only describe as near cartoonish. Panic fluttered through the staff, but the chief's presence kept it contained. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply enforced the law with the authority it demanded. "Sir, I can do this. And I will do this," one firefighter said calmly, almost as if reassuring the manager rather than issuing a threat. Then came the backup. The sheriff's department arrived, deputies moving in formation, taking control of entrances and exits, ensuring compliance and safety. The store, which had felt like a normal retail environment minutes ago, was now transformed into a command center, a nexus of law and order. And there I was, a small part of this grand orchestrated chaos, trying not to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it all. I wandered the aisles, observing the meticulous work unfolding. Firefighters measured each passageway, moved displays, and ensured every exit was unobstructed. Employees whispered to each other, realizing the hierarchy they had relied upon. Corporate mandates. Manager authority was no match for the law. Boxes were shifted. Towering racks were rearranged and holiday decorations swayed slightly as the team worked. Customers murmured among themselves, their shopping lists momentarily forgotten as they watched a store being restructured before their eyes. The aisles, which had been claustrophobic and dangerous, slowly opened up, transforming into safe passageways that could accommodate even the largest crowds in case of emergency. The store manager's voice grew louder, a mix of desperation and indignation. "We're losing thousands of dollars. Customers are angry. Corporate will be furious." The chief's reply was calm, deliberate, and unwavering. "Safety comes first. Comply now, or face consequences later." I moved cautiously through the crowd, watching employees exchange relieved glances as each obstruction was removed. For the first time in my weeks at that store, I noticed subtle smiles breaking through the tense atmosphere. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that law and safety had finally been prioritized over profit and pride. Hours passed, and the store slowly transformed. What had been chaos became order. Aisles that were previously impassable were now wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. Displays were reduced in height, heavy racks moved to safe positions, and products stacked carefully to prevent accidents. Customers, initially bewildered, began to navigate the store more comfortably, still unaware of the meticulous inspection and adjustments that had occurred. Through it all, I remained inconspicuous, blending into the background while secretly feeling a surge of pride. I had followed through on a sarcastic comment, taken responsible action, and set in motion a series of events that ensured the safety of everyone in the store. And yet, I remained unseen, a quiet instigator of monumental change. By mid-afternoon, the chief finally nodded to the store manager. "Everything is now compliant. You may reopen." The doors unlocked. Customers trickled back in, unaware of the significant transformation that had just occurred. The supervisor wandered by, completely oblivious to her offhand comment's impact. And me? I smiled faintly, knowing I had quietly changed the course of that day. Reflecting on the events, I realized something important. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through small, decisive actions. Following through, even on instructions that seem absurd or sarcastic, can ripple outward, creating change that no memo or meeting ever could. I also understood the power of law and authority in the face of stubborn corporate policy. The store manager's orders, though seemingly unshakable, were no match for the structured enforcement of safety regulations. Employees observed the hierarchy shift, understanding that compliance with safety was non-negotiable, even in the midst of holiday chaos. And perhaps most importantly, I learned the subtle influence of quiet courage. By simply taking a step, dialing a number, speaking to the right person, acting responsibly. I had set a chain of events in motion that reshaped the store's environment, ensured safety, and left a lasting impression on everyone involved. In the weeks that followed, the store never returned to its previous chaotic arrangement. Aisles stayed clear, displays were carefully organized, and employees knew that safety regulations were to be taken seriously. The store manager, though still managing corporate expectations, had learned the value of compliance when faced with authoritative enforcement. And the supervisor? She remained blissfully unaware, going about her tasks as if nothing had happened. I returned to my duties, stock and register work resuming its usual rhythm. Yet every time I glanced down an aisle, I felt a quiet satisfaction, a small victory for taking responsible action when the moment demanded it. That day, the lessons were clear. Authority alone does not create change. Courage, responsibility, and the willingness to act, even when it seems absurd, can ripple outward, impacting people, systems, and outcomes far beyond your initial action. And sometimes chaos is not destruction, it's correction. The moment the chief's words echoed through the store, close them down. Time seemed to stretch. Employees froze mid-step, customers gawked, and the store manager's face drained of color. Across 3 levels, chaos erupted, but in a controlled, almost surgical way. This wasn't panic. This was a law and order intervention that nobody had expected. The first thing that hit me was the sound, the click of locks engaging at each entrance, the hum of the alarm system activating, the shuffle of feet as staff and customers alike tried to make sense of what was happening. Employees whispered frantically among themselves, trying to gauge whether this was a drill, a joke, or something far more serious. I, meanwhile, felt a strange thrill, standing in the eye of the storm, invisible but instrumental. The store manager, still in disbelief, barked orders. "Open the doors. You can't do this. It's December. This is peak shopping season." One of the firefighters, calm and composed, stepped forward. "Sir, I can do this. And I will do this." His voice didn't shout, but it carried an authority that made arguing pointless. And just like that, the store became a command center. The sheriff's department arrived shortly after, moving through entrances and exits, directing employees and customers alike. Their presence added a tangible layer of authority, a visible reminder that this wasn't a matter of opinion or corporate preference. This was law and safety in action. I moved through the aisles, observing. The scale of the operation was staggering. Firefighters measured aisle widths with laser devices, checked clearance around stacked merchandise, and repositioned fixtures that had previously seemed immovable. Employees assisted where they could, but their nervous glances told me they now understood their corporate mandates didn't outweigh safety regulations. The store itself had transformed. What had been claustrophobic aisles became navigable spaces. Tall racks were lowered or moved entirely. Boxes and merchandise were stacked safely, and exits, previously blocked by end caps, seasonal displays, or stock, were now clear. The store looked almost unrecognizable. Customers murmured as they were gently guided outside, some bewildered, some amused, others impatient. Staff, previously resigned to their daily grind, now participated actively, following instructions carefully, aware that safety was now the non-negotiable priority. The store manager, meanwhile, oscillated between anger and grudging acceptance. "We're losing thousands of dollars. Customers are angry. Corporate will be furious," he exclaimed, gesturing at employees and displays alike. The chief, calm and deliberate, replied, "Then explain to corporate that safety comes before sales. You can either comply now or face consequences later." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of authority, law, and undeniable logic. I couldn't help but notice the reactions of my fellow employees. Relief, astonishment, even quiet amusement flickered across faces. For once, they weren't dancing to corporate whims. They were part of a realignment where safety ruled. The previous tension dissolved into a mix of respect for the chief's authority and a dawning understanding that this intervention was necessary. Hours passed, and the store gradually transformed from a chaotic maze into a safe, functional shopping environment. Heavy racks were shifted. Seasonal displays were rearranged. Aisles cleared to meet exacting fire codes. Even the holiday decor seemed more purposeful now, unobstructed and visually accessible rather than cluttered and hazardous. I watched from the sidelines, quietly observing the chief and his team. Their methodical approach impressed me, the way they moved, measured, and enforced rules without a hint of panic or frustration. Every action had a purpose, every adjustment a rationale, and every move ensured that, in the event of an emergency, anyone could exit safely. Meanwhile, the store manager continued his protests. "This is absurd. We've never done this before. Corporate will have a fit." The chief remained unflappable. "Sir, this isn't about tradition or convenience. This is about law and safety. You will comply." By mid-afternoon, the final adjustments were made. Fixtures repositioned, exits cleared, products stacked safely. Aisles now allowed clear passage, even for a rush of shoppers in an emergency. The chief finally nodded at the manager. "Everything is compliant. You may reopen, doors unlocked." Employees and customers cautiously returned. Staff whispered excitedly, still absorbing the scale of what had just occurred. The store manager, humbled but intact, patrolled the floor, clipboard in hand, inspecting every display with newfound diligence. Even corporate, despite initial anger, begrudgingly accepted the adjustments. Through it all, the supervisor remained blissfully unaware, moving through the store as if nothing had changed. And me? I kept my quiet satisfaction to myself. My small action, the phone call, the follow-through on a sarcastic comment, had triggered a monumental chain reaction. The store was safer. Employees were safer. Customers were safer. And yet no one knew who had set it all in motion. That evening, as the store returned to normal operations, I reflected on what had just happened. Courage and responsibility don't always make noise. Sometimes they manifest as quiet action, as following through when the opportunity arises, even on a seemingly absurd instruction. I realized that authority alone isn't enough to create change. You need action, you need courage, and sometimes the smallest steps ripple outward, creating effects far beyond what you can predict. A sarcastic comment, a phone call, a willingness to act responsibly. These can become catalysts for monumental outcomes. The store would never return to its previous chaotic state. Aisles remained clear. Displays were reorganized permanently. The store manager, though still focused on corporate priorities, now understood the weight of law and enforcement. Employees adjusted, knowing that safety was paramount, and I walked those cleared aisles with a quiet pride, aware of the unseen but profound impact of my actions. In that moment, I also learned another lesson. Sometimes chaos is corrective. What appears disruptive at first, locked doors, temporary evacuation, restructured merchandise, can ultimately create order, efficiency, and safety. And the irony? All of it stemmed from one small, seemingly inconsequential act, making a phone call. It was humbling in a way. Power isn't always in title, rank, or corporate approval. Power is in action. It's in understanding when to act and having the courage to follow through, even when the stakes seem absurd or inconvenient. That day marked a turning point, not just for the store, but for me. I had witnessed firsthand how law, authority, and responsibility intersect to enforce real-world outcomes. I had seen corporate ego tested by necessity. I had observed employees recalibrate their understanding of hierarchy. And I had learned the subtle but profound impact of quiet, decisive action. As I returned to my routine that evening, restocking shelves, tidying displays, helping customers, I carried with me a newfound understanding. Even small, deliberate actions could ripple outward to create safety, order, and respect. And sometimes, the quietest victories leave the loudest impact. Walking back through the store in the days after the shutdown, the aisles felt different. Wider, safer, more deliberate. Boxes weren't teetering dangerously. Displays were purposeful, not chaotic. And the subtle change in the atmosphere was unmistakable. Employees moved with a quiet confidence. Customers navigated without fear. And even the store manager seemed more measured. As if the fire inspection had reminded him that authority isn't about volume. It's about correctness. The The supervisor, bless her, carried on with her tasks, never recalling the sarcastic comment that had sparked the entire chain of events. She treated me exactly the same as before, unaware of the small but profound ripple her words had created. And that was perfectly fine. Recognition had never been my goal. My satisfaction came quietly, tucked away in the knowledge that a seemingly trivial action, picking up the phone, had made a real difference. It was in those quiet moments, walking the clear aisles and arranging stock, that I realized something fundamental about courage. Courage isn't always about dramatic gestures or loud protests. Sometimes it's as simple as following through. A call made in the evening, a voice explaining the hazards, and a willingness to see it through. It was enough to create change on a scale I hadn't anticipated. I reflected on the chief's professionalism, too. The way he had taken my report, laughed at the absurdity, and then mobilized his team efficiently was a masterclass in authority paired with reason. Authority without action is meaningless. Action without responsibility can be dangerous. But when combined, they can reshape environments, correct unsafe conditions, and even teach lessons that no corporate memo ever could. The store manager, of course, had learned his own lesson. He patrolled the aisles, clipboard in hand, inspecting displays with newfound diligence. He no longer argued casually about corporate mandates versus practicality. Instead, he measured, adjusted, and ensured compliance, not out of fear, but because the law demanded it. There was a subtle humility in his movements, a quiet acknowledgement that safety was not negotiable. Employees began to internalize the lesson too. Where there had been passive compliance or frustration, there was now understanding. They saw that sometimes, following proper channels, even when it seemed inconvenient or absurd, was not only necessary but empowering. The aisles were a testament to what happens when rules, authority, and courage intersect. I found myself thinking about the broader implications. In any workplace, there are those who ignore risks, those who mock regulations, and those who assume someone else will act. I had been in that last category for many jobs, but in this instance, my willingness to follow through, even on a sarcastic instruction, had tangible effects. It wasn't about heroics or showing anyone up. It was about responsibility, accountability, integrity. Weeks later, I moved on to a different job, one that would test my courage in far more dangerous ways. But the lessons from that retail store stayed with me. Observe carefully, act decisively, and understand the weight of even small actions. Sometimes the smallest acts, like making a phone call, voicing a concern, or following through on an instruction, can ripple outward and produce extraordinary outcomes. Looking back, I realize now how rare those quiet victories are. Society tends to celebrate the loud, the obvious, and the dramatic. Yet, some of the most meaningful actions are invisible to the public eye. They don't make headlines. They don't win applause. But they save lives, correct mistakes, and build safer, better workplaces. The irony of my story wasn't lost on me either. A sarcastic comment, likely meant as a momentary venting of frustration, became the spark for one of the most memorable and consequential days of my early career. I hadn't needed to shout, argue, or escalate. I had simply acted. The system did the rest, and that's the lesson I carry with me to this day. Power isn't in position or in volume. It's in action. The courage to act responsibly, even when it seems absurd, can create ripple effects that impact many more lives than we anticipate. I often think about that moment on the phone with the chief. His laughter, his calm but decisive action, and his ability to mobilize his team efficiently. It was a perfect combination of humor, authority, and professionalism. It taught me that the world often relies on those willing to act correctly, while others hesitate. The store manager eventually adjusted. The aisles stayed clear, and the corporate office, despite initial grumbling, accepted the changes. Life in the store returned to normal, or as normal as it could be during the holiday season. But the underlying lesson remained. Courage, accountability, and following through can reshape an environment more effectively than arguments or complaints ever could. Even now, decades later, I reflect on that day with a sense of quiet pride, not because I sought recognition, but because I understood the power of subtle action. Small actions, like a simple phone call, can have monumental consequences. Courage doesn't need an audience. Compliance doesn't need applause. Integrity doesn't need validation. And sometimes the smallest spark, a sarcastic "call the fire department," can ignite change that echoes for years. It's a reminder that responsibility matters, that safety matters, and that sometimes the quietest acts are the most transformative. If there's one thing I hope anyone listening takes away from this story, it's this. Small actions have consequences. Courage doesn't always roar. And following through, even when it seems trivial, can change everything. So, to anyone out there facing a situation where rules are ignored, hazards overlooked, or safety compromised, don't wait. Observe, think critically, and act responsibly, even when it feels absurd. Even when no one expects it, your actions can ripple outward in ways you cannot imagine. And for those of you who've stayed with me through this story, thank you. Stories like these remind us that courage, cleverness, and integrity can exist in the quietest moments, and that everyday decisions can have extraordinary consequences. If you want to hear more stories of quiet victories, clever acts, and life lessons drawn from real experiences, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Each story we share is a reminder that ordinary actions, done with awareness, courage, and responsibility, can create extraordinary outcomes. Trust me, the next story you'll hear is one you won't want to miss. It involves real danger, quick thinking, and lessons that could literally save your life. But for now, remember this. Even the smallest act of courage can create a ripple that changes everything, and sometimes all it takes is following through.